As a young boy, Justin Trudeau first travelled to China with his father. It was no ordinary trip. His dad was, after all, Pierre Trudeau, Canada's Prime Minister. The elder Trudeau earned the affection of China's leaders by being among the first in the West to recognise the People's Republic in 1970, 9 years before the United States. More than 4 decades later, much has changed. China has grown into an economic powerhouse, and Canada's relations with Beijing has, in the words of the country's new Prime Minister, fallen a little off the priority list. A recent poll by the Asia Pacific Foundation of Canada showed that while 46% of Canadians support a free trade agreement with China, only 11% approve of investment by Chinese state-owned businesses in Canada. So, where do things stand between the two countries following Prime Minister Trudeau's visit? We'll ask our distinguished panel. Joining us from Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, via Skype is Jia Wang. She's the Deputy Director of the China Institute at the University of Alberta. Laura Dawson is the Director of the Canada Institute at the Wilson International Centre for Scholars, right here in Washington, D.C. With us from Montreal, Canada, is Sarah Kutulakos. She serves as the Executive Director of the Canada-China Business Council. And joining us from Beijing is the anchor of CCTV's World Insight program, Tian. Thanks to all of you for joining us. And Tian, let me start with you. You conducted an exclusive interview with Prime Minister Trudeau while he was in China. What were some of the highlights of that?
Well, certainly Prime Minister Trudeau was very upbeat about the China-Canada trade ties, and he was specifically talking about the Canadian pavilion being established on the Alibaba platform, certainly introducing the Canadian products to the Chinese consumers directly. He's also been talking about the Canadian politics as he sees it. The important aspect of it, one is to gear up more youth to participate in politics, and the other is to have more gender equity in the administration. Overall, he is very upbeat about China-Canada ties. He's also been very frank. He said that two countries should learn how to communicate with one another and even at times face challenges.
You know, it was a fascinating interview. We're going to play a few sound bites from that interview, especially on economic growth and trade relations during the program. But I want to get your reaction to this particular sound bite. Let's watch this.
To be a feminist, you just have to recognize that women should have the same opportunities as men, and that there's still a lot of work to do to get there. If you can say yes to both those things, well, congratulations, you're a feminist. I think more men should be open about saying they're feminists, because it's not just about women saying we need more opportunities. It should be smart men saying, yes, women need more opportunities.
So what did you make of that?
Well, it is certainly a very interesting message Prime Minister Trudeau sent out, particularly when it comes to the makeup of his administration, half men, half women. It's not necessarily about the quota system, but rather to look at the individual's capabilities. And he's also, of course, very outspoken. He has claimed himself as a feminist, and he has also been interacting with Chinese women, business community, social and also cultural circles when he came to China. And he's been talking about promoting gender equity in the workforce. And of course, when you look at his office, even the Prime Minister's office, two managers, one is man, the other is women. So you see these kinds of evidence coming from the very new generation of world leaders talking about gender equity as one of the way forward. That is also one of the things that people look at when it comes to inclusive growth, which is one of the most important themes of the G20 summit. In fact, in the communique of the G20 summit, at the end of it, it is being clearly written to gear up a more gender equity, women and youth participation.
Okay, let's get to the rest of our panel. And Laura, you co-authored a report earlier this year entitled "Why an Economic Agreement with China is Necessary for Canada's Continued Prosperity." Why do you believe that to be the case? Because the Canadians don't seem to be in too much of a hurry to sign a free trade deal with China. We had the Trade Minister, Chrystia Freeland, who said that Canada will be taking its time about this.
Right. I believe it to be the case because traditionally Canada has been really reliant on the United States as its primary trading partner, and it will continue to be an important trading partner for Canada. But Canada and Canadians recognize that they are a trading nation. They must export globally in order to continue to be economically viable. China is the largest potential market in the world, so there's no reason why Canada should not explore that more closely. At the same time, Canada is a very small country. recently. Canada's had a hot and cold relationship with China as it's been feeling its way over the last decade. And so there are folks in Canada who would like to take the continued engagement or closer engagement with China on a more slower pace.
Jia Wang, if we look at some of the specifics during this visit by the Canadian Prime Minister, after his meeting with the Chinese Premier Li Keqiang, the Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said that Canada intends joining the Chinese-backed Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. How important is that? How significant is that for relations between the two countries?
I believe it is important, as it is a very important infrastructure bank that is backed by China, and although its focus is in Asia, but it is a region that would need further strengthening in infrastructure, and Canada agrees to be part of this bank that indicates that Canada want to be part of this network framework that helped established by China and then also joined by a couple of other developed countries, and Canada hopes to also take advantage of the opportunities that are offered there.
Tian, let's listen to what the Canadian Prime Minister had to say about China's proposed involvement with the AIIB.
Canada is building high-quality infrastructure in China, across Asia, around the world. So we come with a significant amount of expertise. But being able to join in this excellent initiative of the AIIB that China is leading on, that is going to create opportunities not just for citizens in China, but for citizens across Asia to get access to good infrastructure. I mean, we know investments in infrastructure create good jobs in the short term, but lead to productivity gains and growth in the long term, and that's something that's really important.
So, Tian, Canada sees great opportunities in getting involved in the infrastructure projects that are financed by the AIIB, but how is it being seen in China?
Well, certainly a lot of Chinese are quite excited about this. I earlier even talked to Mr. Jin Lichun, who is now the president of AIIB. He is, of course, a Chinese citizen. Together with his colleague, he said at the AIIB now, he welcomed the gesture coming from Canada to apply to join AIIB. Now, he also explained there has to be an approval process before Canada can be officially regarded as members of AIIB, but certainly welcome that kinds of application from Canada. And I even asked him, Mr. Jin, who is the president of AIIB, whether that is a gesture in a way that should be considered very carefully by the other two North American countries, namely the United States and Mexico. He said, maybe I read too much into it. However, certainly there is some messages, it seems, that Canada, by applying to join AIIB to the other two countries. Having said that, though, Canada itself seems to try to make clear that it has advantages in infrastructure building. Also, it wants to tap into the trade possibilities inside Asia. Now, we don't want to forget that the United States, which has been Canada's neighbor, geographically speaking, has been very instrumental in tapping into the Asia trade opportunities, very much included those from China. So Canada obviously don't want to miss that train. And this Prime Minister has been enjoying, even from a family tradition, some closer ties with China. Prime Minister Trudeau, during his exclusive interview with me, he told me that he visited China 3 times before the state visit. 2 were during his very young days with his father. First time as Prime Minister, second time as old friend of China, and third time he's traveling on his own, backpacking, going through the Siberian train, and really to see real China. So obviously there has been an official understanding of the importance of trade, and also his personal recognition of that as well.
Sarah, looking at Canada's intention to join the bank, what kind of advantages would that bring to Canada, specifically Canadian businesses?
Well, I mean, certainly there's the overall high-level advantage of the relationship acknowledgement that joining the AIIB brings. By standing on the sidelines initially, Canada somewhat marginalized itself. But if we look really at the infrastructure investment opportunities, the AIIB is really quite closely linked with the policy initiative within China of One Belt, One Road, or OBOR. And when the Prime Minister was in China last week, we held a policy conference at which one of the speakers, I thought, put it very well in terms of the advantages for Canadian companies. This is a company called Dawson in Chongqing that has made an investment in a seaplane company in Canada. And they talked about what brought what the both sides bring to each other. But he said, you know, Dawson, as a very diversified company, is also investing around the world. And he specifically brought up a factory that they're building in Pakistan, which again would be very much linked with the One Belt, One Road. And he said, you know, we need Canadian technologies and Canadian products to help build this factory to the standards that we expect. And that type of opportunity would not come to a Canadian company that was just trying to crack open the door all by itself. So I think the AIIB, the primary benefit is the general acknowledgement of China's economic role in the world, and then as well digging deeper into the infrastructure opportunities that collaboration with Chinese companies can bring.
Laura, what kind of major changes can we expect after this visit by Justin Trudeau? We know that there have been restrictions on Chinese investment in Canada, in the real estate sector, in the energy sector as well. Is that expected to change?
I think what we'll find is a more consistent approach to relations with China. I think under the previous government, it was hot and cold, 2 steps forward and then 1 step back. It was not always clear whether or not Canada was open to Chinese investment. In certain sectors, absolutely. In other sectors, not so much. There was a great deal of appreciation of the appeal of a greater engagement with China, but when it came to actually signing on the dotted line for things like free trade agreements,